everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth and Story, and as you can see from the title, this is just sort of a little bit of a ramble about what I have learned about loss and about the grieving process. And this is really just going to be a casual conversation about it. I had created a video, I need to turn off something on my computer. I had made a video yesterday with the three voices reading, and I did a general reading on myself. And some of the grieving process showed up in the cards, as is very often the case when I try to do readings on myself as an example, because I just don't work with fake readings very well. I think that using just fake with no question and no intention behind the reading as examples doesn't usually end up working because there's no answer there, right? So you're not going to have any cohesiveness. So I do always tend to have something behind it. And so when I use myself, sometimes it gets a little personal, right? And so that happened, and some issues surrounding the grieving process cropped up, not surprisingly. And Annika from Nobody's Here had left a comment that, that she was glad that I talked about it, even though it might be difficult. And so we kind of had a little conversation in the chat, the comment section. That's some of that for me has changed over the time that I've been doing YouTube videos. I've always been very open about the loss of my son, which is about 3.5 years ago now. About 3.5 years now, and so I've always been very open about that, but I will say that has receded a little bit. I still mention it. It's part of my life. It's not going to never be there, ever not be there. But I've definitely stepped back a little bit from direct videos regarding it because of just some negative feedback, which I intellectually know is a very small segment of the viewership population, but it does affect, causes you to be more selective and causes you to think carefully about subjects because of those things, which is good. And I was telling Annika in the comments, I'm like, it's good to be selective. It's good to be be mindful of what you're putting out there, but at the same time you also don't want it to squelch you from having conversations about something that you think is important. My son, for those of you who may be new to the channel and haven't seen some, I have some older videos that were quite explicit on the grieving process, but I've got over 300, probably closing on 400 videos, so those can be lost. But so for those of you who are new to the channel, my son was born with a rare genetic defect. I do apologize. I have horrible allergies right now. So you can tell when I'm crying and when I'm not. I'm literally, my eyes do not stop watering. So I do apologize for that. It's probably bad timing to do a video on grief. But anyways, my son was born with a very rare genetic defect. We thought it was asphyxiating thoracic dystrophy, which is also known as June syndrome, which is a really rare syndrome in which the bone structure of the rib cage and the long bones of the arms and legs are deformed, and it creates a very restrictive respiratory environment for the lungs and can cause all kinds of problems. Well, so because he would have been 26. So bad. I have to stop and think all the time. He would have, not just him, even my daughter. So he would have been 26. They didn't have the genetic testing that they do now. And so when he was 18, he had some issues because one side of his lungs was much weaker, because that was the side that the rib cage was the most deformed. your lungs structure actually helps to maintain your up. The body is an amazing thing, and because he had a weak side, his spine began to collapse to that side, and it actually pinched off his airway, and so he had lost part of his lung capacity on the right side, and so we had gone to a hospital out of town to see about putting a stent in to prop open what had we thought had been, it was just kind of gotten. At first, we actually thought maybe it had just gotten a little bit loose and had collapsed. But when we went to this hospital, we found out that it was actually being pinched closed, and B, we found out almost immediately because this hospital that we went to was absolutely amazing in the way that they approached the whole body of. It was a children's hospital, and instead of having different specialists like all segmented off, each looking at their own piece, every single week they come together as a whole and look at each child that is under their care from the whole body. So all the specialists are at the table discussing that case. I think it's absolutely amazing, and it instantly, in this round table effect, where instead of just respiratory looking here in their own bubble, and digestive things over here in their bubble, and this over here in their bubble, instead of that, they were all talking, and immediately two of the groups said, I don't think that in fact, the one said that he would put a lot of money on the fact that he did not have asphyxiating thoracic dystrophy, but that he had Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And so through the course of the next, it was a couple months or so, it was a process of, genetic testing and all these kinds of things, and coming to find out through genetic testing that he actually did have Shwachman-Diamond syndrome. And it was quite shocking because, you already live with a really rare syndrome for 18 years, and then all of a sudden it's kind of turned on its nose. And then there's a lot of factors that go into, like, if we had known, because Shwachman-Diamond syndrome is really a bone marrow failure syndrome, and there can be bone abnormalities as well, which we saw in Michael's chest, and we did know that his bone marrow didn't work correctly, but we didn't know why. And so there were some things in the way that they absorb fatty things, much like cystic fibrosis has problems. They don't make use of fat solubles. It just flushes right out of the system, and so there's a lot of problems with weight gaining and weight maintenance. And he had failure to thrive issues his whole life, but we didn't know the cause of it. And had we known that and been able to use some of the enzymes that are available and things, so your brain starts to go in there, like, oh, if we had known, could that have made a significant difference? But you can't do that. They simply didn't have the testing then. Isabel, no. She's a dog. She's gonna bark because people are walking. Anyways, I'm totally getting off topic. So the point is that so we found that out. It was quite shocking. It was quite on one hand, it was a relief to know how a lot of the pieces of the puzzle fit in together, and at the same time, at that age of 18, where so much damage had already been done to the lungs and to everything that that those what if we'd known kind of questions were very difficult, and very quickly you learn you just have to set that aside because you are living with what you have right in front of you. I don't even know how I got started on this because this really wasn't. Oh, my point was that through this whole process because both June syndrome as well as Shwachman-Diamonds are extremely rare diseases, and they're both life-threatening, and they are both chronic and quite difficult to live with. And so from the moment that Michael was born, and then we took him home a month later, it was feeding tubes and oxygen and monitors and hospital stays beyond hospital stays beyond hospital stays. And so I always have, from the get-go, been very open about the what it means to live with a sick child from day one, and to live with chronic illness, and to live with knowing that your child could die, very realistically could die, and continually there was always these moments of, okay, it's probably not going to be the weekend, okay, it's probably not going to be the month, okay, take him home, but it probably won't be more than a year. There were always those moments. There were so many moments. In fact, what was interesting is that one of Michael's primary respiratory doctors, when Michael was in the hospital and it was passing, he was in the process of dying, his doctor, who was his doctor from day one, until he was 18 or so, when he was taken out, kind of more of his primary care went to people who worked specifically with Schwachman Diamond. He came to visit Michael in the hospital. Michael wasn't conscious, but he came and talked to me. And he said that Michael was the one that taught him to not give those kinds of things, to not say, it's probably not going to be the rest of the weekend. It's probably not going to be a month. You've probably got a year. He learned from Michael to not do that, because time and time and time again, we were given those kinds of dates, those end dates, and time again, he would pull through. And even at the last time that happened, we went to do surgery to hopefully correct the spine when he would have been 19. He would have probably just turned 19, and we went to do the surgery to hopefully correct the spine problem, and perhaps relieve some of the pressure, and maybe gain some of the lung function back. We couldn't even get past pre-op, because just giving him the platelets that were necessary caused him to kind of go into almost like a congestive heart failure. His fluid started getting around his heart, his lungs started filling up, and we couldn't even get past pre-op. And we were again told, we're at the palliative care stage. Like, as medical professions, there's nothing else they could do, because everything that they could do would cause harm, or had the potential for causing more harm than good. And so, it was kind of time to wait, and that it would be the next pneumonia would take him. He probably wouldn't live out the year. Same thing that we'd had so many times with him. And we had 3 years after that, about 3 years after that point. But yeah, so his doctor his main doctor had said that Michael taught him to not predict those kinds of things, because the human body and the human spirit is amazing. And I don't mean that just for now we don't have allergies. I don't mean that just for the person who is sick, and the person who's physically dealing with these things. It's not just that, it's the human spirit. And that's one of the things that I've really learned, and I really wanted to say throughout from the moment that I had a voice as a mother with a sick child. I wanted people to understand that we have a great capacity for lows and a great capacity for highs, because I think that very often we celebrate, understandably so, we celebrate those high moments, right? We celebrate what it means to overcome. We celebrate what it means to be successfully navigating a difficult situation, what it means to be successfully, pushing forward no matter the cost. Like, we celebrate those moments, which is, again, understandable and necessary. But very early on, as a very young mother, I was 21, as a very young mother with a very sick child whose life and mental and emotional and exhaustion sphere didn't always line up with these books about, that just go you, like, we're strong and you're wonderful, and this mother is doing all these things, and they were it's not that they weren't true, but it didn't say the whole picture. Because when you're in the middle of the night and you've got your baby and he's sick, and you're taking him back in the hospital the next day, and you're overwhelmed by that pain, that's strength too, because you keep moving, even in even in those moments that are the worst, that this is hell, that you literally feel like, I cannot do this, and you do. That is an example of the strength of the human spirit. And so I always felt that it was so important to highlight the dark as well as the light, because it's in the dark, and if we don't realize that other people are in the dark with you, it's extremely lonely, and it's extremely isolating to feel like, why is this person doing so amazing, right? Why does this person look like they're going through similar things, and yet they seem like they're skipping through? And what's wrong with me that I'm sitting here in the dark, sometimes curled up in a fetal position, and feeling like, just feeling like I can't barely breathe? What's wrong with me? And I asked myself that constantly as this young person. I very often want to go back to that younger me and say, oh my gosh, sweetie, you're amazing. I literally want to go back to my me self, and say, my younger self, and say, sweetie, you've got this, number one. And number two, you're amazing. You're strong. You want to go back and say that. So I never want somebody else who is in a difficult situation to think, why is everybody doing so wonderful and I'm not, because you're wonderful. You're amazing. I watch a YouTube channel called, I think it's called The Fry Life, Frey, and it's a young woman, I should say, a young woman who would be about my son's age, who is about what my son would be. She has cystic fibrosis, and so I watched her channel, and she had put out a video called You Are a Star, I think, and talking about the same sort of topic, that it's great to see the people with cystic fibrosis who are running marathons and doing all those kinds of things. But for those people who, because of whatever circumstances, simply can't, their marathon is getting up and going to the bathroom, right? And their marathon is clearing their airways, that it's important to have those conversations. And it's conversations that I had with Michael all the time. If he sat up in bed, especially near the end, if he sat up in bed and he drew something, produced a beautiful drawing, of which I have all of them, that was his marathon. He was getting up and he was engaging in his world, and that made him incredibly strong, just as strong. And it doesn't take anything away from the person who's running in a marathon. They're strong too. It's just they're different levels, and they're different nuances of strength. And same thing with the grieving process. If you are in the middle of grieving the loss of somebody, and you can't get out of bed, and it's a stay under the covers kind of a day, that's okay. That's okay, because we have them. Everybody who is experiencing loss, everybody who's experiencing grief, are going to have dark moments. And there's nothing wrong with you. It is not weakness. It is strength to feel emotions. And I think that sometimes we get confused on that topic. And that's one of the things, I've talked about this before. What did Buddhism and Taoism teach me as a person? And this was fairly early on, in my 20s, that I experienced that aha moment of leaning into emotions. I know that Buddhism can come across as being one of detachment from emotions. The way that I perceived Buddhism and the way that the books that I read and the things that I learned from it was anything but that. It was much more of a leaning in and experiencing. It takes strength to experience emotion. It takes strength to experience pain and not run away from it. It takes strength to experience loss and fully be in that moment, and it takes strength to do that. Just as much as it takes strength to sometimes know when we have to set it aside and keep moving forward because life has to be lived. Their strength is such a nuanced word. Is it the muscle bodybuilder, right? Is it the person who is persevering, or is it also the person who is sitting in the corner devastated but sitting with it? It's all of those things. Strength incorporates many different nuances, and to ever take one over the other, I think just has the side effect, unintentional. I do believe the unintentional effect of leaving people feeling extremely isolated and feeling as if they were failures. And so my very long rambling point is that's always been really important to me, that people who are also, when I was in the mode of living with a young child who was constantly in the hospital and sick and these things, at that phase of my life, it was important to me that other people who were living through mothering or fathering a child with chronic illness understood that there are lows and there are highs, and both of those are reflections of your strength, regardless of where you are. In the process of palliative care, same thing. Wanted that to be very open conversation about what does it mean to be shifting from actively caring and trying to find cures and trying to overcome, to having to switch as a parent to waiting. That's a whole nother, it's a whole different set of emotional reactions and circumstances and experiences. And many of them, much of that 3-year period was very, very difficult. And I don't think it's something that I ever really, I probably did. I grasped it as well as I could to be able to get through. But I don't feel like I ever quite succeeded at palliative care. My brain is very much of, what are we going to do to fix this? What are we going to do to make this at least as best as we can? What are we going to pursue? What should we be doing? Should we be trying this? Should we be trying that? And to turn that off and try to do the waiting thing is not something that I was ever good at, but it was always something that I was open about. And when the time, came and then he passed away, the same thing. It was very important to me that people saw it for what it is. It just weren't like, oh, I don't want somebody to ever just say, oh wow, like she looks like she's doing really good. She's incredibly strong. Because most of the time I wasn't able to function in the first year. If they had seen me, would they have still said, oh, she's so strong? Because I was so strong, even in those moments that it was so difficult that you think, I can't breathe. I cannot do this. I don't want to do this. That's strength. And I think that is so that is a lifelong goal of mine, that people understand the full scope of living with difficulties, whatever that may be. My personal experience is having my first child be very sick and be sick for his entire life and have to deal with those chronic long-term issues. And then my experience is losing that child and having to try to figure out, how do I move forward in a landscape that doesn't have half of me. I have 2 children, and to have half of me missing, at least from this physical plane, is extremely excruciating and extremely difficult. And sharing that with people that are in, that's my point being is that's my experience. Somebody else's experience might be different. They might be the person who's sick, who's having to deal with chronic illness. They might be the person who has had a horrible childhood with no support system, and family means something completely different and completely not safe and completely not good, right? That might be the experience. There's all kinds of experiences that cause grief, right? So the specific thing is less important, or the specific, my specific story is less important than my specific message, which is that strength looks like a variety of things. And sometimes when you look at something, it looks like weakness to yourself, sometimes even to other people, but very often to ourselves. When you feel like you're in your weakest, sometimes that's an expression of your strongest. And I think that that's really important message, an important message for me personally. And so I don't ever want to shy away from that conversation, because that is a conversation that I've been having with myself for my entire adult life. My entire, I was married, and then, a year or so later, I had this baby. And so my entire life, adult life, this is the story of my adult life. This is the internal questioning and delving into and wondering, and it's been the eternal question for me. What does strength look like? Because for so long, I mistook strength for failure. I mistook strength for weakness. And the idea that there is one other person who might see a video or might read a blog post, when I was back doing a lot of blog, that the idea that there was one person who might see or read something that I wrote or said and say and understand that they are not weak, that they are in fact incredibly strong, that's worth any kind of embarrassment or feeling of vulnerability. That's worth that, because it's that important to me, that one person who's grieving the loss of their son. And I know, because I know many of my viewers, I know that there are viewers of mine who have lost their son. I know there are viewers who have lost their daughter. I know that there are viewers that have lost their significant other. I know that there are viewers that are heartbroken over the loss of a security in a family that they've never had, that they've never experienced. I know there are people who have lost in so many different ways, because I read for them and I see their strength. And you know who you are, and you know that I see you, and I see how incredibly strong you are. At the moment when you feel the weakest, you are incredibly strong, and I see that. It's not measured by those high moments. It's measured by those low moments. I really do believe that that's measured. The measurement is higher at those lower moments. And I think that that's not a message that I ever want to have filtered. So this truly is for anybody out there who has known grief, who has known loss, who has known constant struggle, who has known the dark spaces. This is why having light and shadow is so important to me, because life is made up of dark and shadow, and it is no less important in the dark than it is in the light. That both, the whole spectrum is what's important. But this is for all of you out there who grieve, who struggle. I just want you to know, because I can't, I don't have a time machine to go back and tell, 21-year-old Kelly, or 22-year-old Kelly, or 24-year-old Kelly, or 28-year-old Kelly, who's just watching her son realize at 8 that he might die for the first time. In the devastation. you're strong. I don't have that time machine to go back and do that, but I can say it to anybody who's watching this, that if you are functioning, if you are still moving forward, um, and if you're even paused, because truthfully, sometimes just sitting there and sitting with those feelings before picking up and moving on, that's where your strength lies. You are okay. You are amazingly strong. The human spirit astounds me time and time again. Michael was the first person to teach me. Well, there were other people who taught me, but Michael taught me on a continual level the strength of the human spirit. And as a tarot reader for other people, who come very often in hard times, right? Very often people are getting readings when things are difficult. And so I have the express honor to sometimes sit with people in really difficult times, and I see the strength of the human spirit, and it is incredible. And it should be celebrated, not just for winning the marathon, but for also those really dark moments and enduring those dark times and those really difficult moments. So this is for you. Keep moving, keep moving forward, keep living, keep feeling, even though it is so incredibly difficult. You are not alone in the dark. You aren't alone in the dark.